We thought losing our daughter was the worst thing until we read her last letter.
When the social worker first called, I thought it was a scam. She said our adopted daughter Emma might not have been legally surrendered as an infant. My heart stopped. For 10 years, I had been her mother. Every scraped knee, every school play, every sleepless night. And now someone was telling me that maybe, just maybe, Emma was never supposed to be ours. My husband, Michael, took the phone from me when I couldn't speak anymore. I remember his voice shaking as he asked, "What are you saying exactly?" The woman on the line, her name was Carla, explained that a recently retired hospital clerk had come forward with information about a baby mix-up at the same hospital where Emma had been born. 2 infants, both born on the same night. One was legally placed for adoption. The other, she said quietly, might have been taken by mistake. I sat down on the kitchen floor. My hands were cold, but my face burned. "That's impossible," I whispered. But deep down, something in me already knew it could be true. Emma was adopted through a private agency after her biological mother signed the release forms. Everything had seemed legitimate. But what if those papers had been signed under the wrong baby's name? Carla said the state was reopening several adoption cases connected to that hospital. DNA testing would be voluntary for now, but she strongly recommended it. "This could affect your daughter's legal status," she said gently. I hung up and stared at the family photos lining our kitchen wall. Emma at 3 in her red raincoat. Emma at 7 missing her front teeth. Emma last month holding our dog in the backyard. She was my daughter. No test could change that. When I told Emma that night, I tried to sound calm. "Honey, do you remember when we talked about how you were adopted?" She nodded, twirling her hair. I explained that the hospital where she was born might have made a mistake, and they wanted to do a DNA test, just to be sure everything was right. She looked at me with wide, serious eyes and asked, "Does that mean I might have another mom somewhere?" My throat tightened. "We don't know yet," I said softly. "But no matter what, I'm always your mom." Michael and I mailed in the DNA kits 2 days later. Waiting for the results felt like waiting for a bomb to go off. Every moment of normal life felt fragile, like I was living inside glass. When the envelope finally came, my hands shook so hard I could barely open it. It was true. The DNA showed that Emma wasn't biologically related to the woman who had signed the adoption papers. Somewhere out there, another family had lost a baby. Their baby. And never knew why. Michael sat in silence, staring at the results. I couldn't stop crying. "They'll take her away," I said. "They'll come for her." He put his arms around me and said, "No one's taking our daughter." "We'll fight 2 days later," Carla called again. The state had located the other family, the Parkers. Their baby, Grace, had died of SIDS at 3 months old, but the autopsy listed a different name. When the mistake was uncovered, the Parkers learned their real daughter, Emma, had been alive all this time, and they wanted to meet her. I couldn't breathe. How could I tell Emma that the parents who were supposed to raise her had spent 10 years grieving a baby who wasn't theirs? And how could I face them, the people whose child I'd loved as my own? Carla said the Parkers didn't want to take Emma. They just wanted to know her. But I'd heard those words before, and they rarely ended peacefully. That night, I went into Emma's room after she'd fallen asleep. Her hair was spread across the pillow, her breathing slow and even. I brushed a strand from her forehead and whispered, "You're mine. You'll always be mine." But even as I said it, I wasn't sure who I was trying to convince, her or myself. The morning we were supposed to meet the Parkers, I couldn't eat. My stomach felt like stone. Michael tried to reassure me, but I could see the fear behind his calm voice. We'd agreed to meet at a neutral place, a family center supervised by the state, so it would feel safe for everyone. Still, I kept thinking, how do you prepare to face the people who should have raised your daughter? Emma was nervous too. She kept asking, "What if they don't like me?" I knelt in front of her and took her hands. "They're going to love you?" I said, even though part of me wasn't sure I would love them. When we arrived, Carla met us at the door. "They're already here," she whispered. My heartbeat quickened as she led us to a small room filled with too much light. The Parkers stood up when we entered, a man and woman about our age, holding hands tightly. The mother's eyes were wet before she even spoke. "Hi," she said softly. "I'm Laura. And this is my husband." Daniel. Emma looked at them shyly, half hiding behind my arm. I introduced her, my voice trembling. Laura took a hesitant step forward. "You look just like your baby photos," she whispered, and then she started to cry. It was the strangest mix of pain and tenderness I'd ever felt, watching this woman cry over my daughter, realizing she wasn't wrong to do so. The room felt too small for all the love and grief pressing into it. We spent the next hour talking carefully, like walking on glass. They told us about the night their baby died, how they had always felt something was off, how the details didn't add up, how the hospital brushed them aside. Daniel said, "For 10 years we blamed ourselves. We thought we'd failed her. I wanted to say I was sorry, but the words wouldn't come. Sorry didn't mean anything here. I'd lived the life they were supposed to have, and no apology could fix that." When Emma finally spoke, her voice was tiny. "So, you're my other parents?" Laura wiped her eyes. "We're your birth parents," she said gently. "We never stopped loving you, even when we didn't know where you were." Emma frowned, thinking hard. "But I already have a mom and dad," she said, pointing at us. Laura nodded, smiling through tears. "I know, sweetheart. You do. That night, after Emma went to bed, Michael and I sat in silence. The house felt different, like a stranger had walked through it. "They're good people," I said finally. "Yeah," Michael agreed. "Too good." The next few weeks became a blur of phone calls and meetings. The Parkers wanted to be part of Emma's life, and the state encouraged open contact. I told myself this was fair, and that Emma deserved to know where she came from, but part of me feared losing her bit by bit. One evening, Laura called to ask if she could give Emma a birthday gift, a small necklace that had belonged to her grandmother. I said yes, but when Emma opened it, her eyes filled with tears. "Do I have to choose?" she asked. That question haunted me. How do you explain to a 10-year-old that love doesn't erase other love? That families can overlap without breaking? I started keeping a journal again, the way I had during our adoption process. Some nights I'd write for hours, trying to make sense of it all. I realized that for 10 years, I'd thought adoption was an ending, a door closing on the past, but now I saw it was only a pause, waiting for the truth to catch up. Then, one Sunday afternoon, Emma came home from spending a few hours with the Parkers. She ran into my arms, but her eyes were swollen from crying. "Mom," she whispered, "I think they miss me too much." My heart shattered. "Do you want to stop seeing them?" I asked. She shook her head. "No, I just don't know how to make everyone happy." I held her close, realizing that was the truth at the center of everything. There was no way to make everyone happy. Someone would always hurt. That night, I stood by her bed again, watching her sleep, the same way I had the night the letter came. I thought of Laura somewhere across town, probably doing the same thing, staring at the same sleeping child in her mind. 2 mothers, 1 daughter, and a story that had no right ending. It started with a letter from the state, review of custodial arrangements. Those 3 words froze me. Even though Carla had promised no one was trying to take Emma, now it felt like that safety was slipping away. Michael read the letter twice and whispered, "They're not saying they'll change anything. Just review it." But his voice lacked conviction. The Parkers hadn't asked for custody. They'd been respectful, cautious even. But when the state gets involved, feelings don't always matter. Paperwork does. And somewhere in that paperwork, our names and theirs were tangled together, like a knot no one could untie. I told Emma about the hearing as gently as I could. She listened quietly, then said, "So I have to go talk to people about who I want to live with?" I shook my head quickly. "No, honey. It's just for the grown-ups. You don't have to do anything." But she looked unconvinced. At night, she started having nightmares again, the kind she'd had when she was little. She'd wake up crying, saying she dreamed someone was taking her away. I'd hold her until she fell asleep again, but each time she clung to me tighter, as if she feared I might disappear by morning. The day of the review, the hearing room felt sterile. Gray walls, no warmth, no life. Laura and Daniel sat on one side, we sat on the other. Carla was there too, her face kind but tired. When it was my turn to speak, my voice trembled. "Emma is our daughter. We've raised her with love and stability. She knows who she is, where she belongs. We're not trying to erase her history. We just want to protect her future." Then Laura stood up. She wasn't angry. That almost made it harder. "We're not here to take Emma," she said softly. "We just want her to know she has 2 families that love her. That her story didn't start with pain. It started with a mistake that people are trying to make right." The room went silent. The judge nodded slowly, then said he would review all considerations carefully. It was over in an hour, but I felt a decade older walking out. Weeks passed with no word. Every day felt suspended, like we were living inside a question mark. Then, one afternoon, Carla called again. "The court's decision is final," she said. My heart pounded as I waited for her to continue. "The adoption stands," she said gently. "You remain Emma's legal parents. But the judge encourages ongoing, structured contact with the Parkers, in Emma's best interest." I should have felt relieved. Instead, I just started crying. The fight was over, but peace didn't come with it. That weekend, we invited the Parkers to dinner. No social worker, no forms, no neutral ground. Just all of us together. I wanted to try, even if it hurt. When they arrived, Emma ran to Laura first. She hugged her tightly, and for the first time, I didn't feel jealousy, just sadness, deep and quiet. Daniel brought a photo album. "These are from when you were born," he said, sliding it across the table. "We thought you might want to see." Emma flipped through the pages slowly. Hospital photos, baby blankets, little footprints. "That's me?" she asked, amazed. Laura nodded, tears in her eyes. Later that night, after they left, Emma curled up next to me on the couch. "Mom," she said sleepily, "do I have to pick one of you?" I swallowed the lump in my throat. "No, sweetheart. You don't have to pick. You just get to be loved twice." She smiled, half asleep. "Then maybe I'm lucky." I kissed her forehead, whispering, "Maybe we all are." But even as I said it, I knew luck wasn't the right word. What we had now wasn't luck. It was a fragile truce between loss and love, between past and present. And maybe that was enough. That night, when I looked out the window, I saw Laura standing by her car across the street. She wasn't crying, just looking at our house, her arms wrapped around herself. I thought about going out to her, but I didn't. Some silences don't need to be filled. She raised her hand in a small wave, and I waved back. For the first time, it didn't feel like we were on opposite sides. Just 2 mothers, finally learning how to share the same love. A full year passed after the hearing, though sometimes it felt like 10. The chaos had settled, but the air in our house was still fragile. like a room where something valuable had once shattered and been carefully swept up, yet tiny pieces still glittered under the light. Emma had grown quieter. She wasn't sad exactly, just thoughtful in a way children shouldn't have to be. At school she thrived, but at night she asked questions that didn't have easy answers. Do you think I would have liked their house? What would my room have looked like if I'd grown up with them? I'd tell her that she could imagine both, that her story didn't have to be either or. But every time she asked, I could see a little uncertainty bloom in her eyes, like she was learning that love could be complicated, that belonging could have seams. The Parkers came over every few weeks. Sometimes we met at the park, sometimes at our house. At first, the meetings felt tense, each side trying to measure how much was too much, how close we were allowed to stand near the fire before it burned again. But slowly, something softened. One Sunday, Laura brought a pie she'd baked with Emma. "She's quite the little chef," she said, laughing. And just like that, the laughter filled the house again. Real, not forced. Even Michael joined in, telling Daniel stories from Emma's soccer games. It wasn't perfect, but it was becoming something new. Not one family replacing another, but a kind of bridge between lives. That night, after everyone left, I found Emma at her desk drawing. On the paper were two houses, one blue, one yellow, with a little girl standing in between them, holding both doors open. "It's me," she said simply, "so I can go between whenever I want." I smiled, though my chest ached. "That's beautiful, sweetheart." Spring came, and with it, Emma's 11th birthday. Laura asked if she could help plan it, and for the first time, I said yes without hesitation. We decided on a picnic in the park, balloons, sandwiches, a big cake with her name written in bright icing. When the day came, everything felt strangely easy. Laura and I worked side by side, laughing as we tried to keep the candles from blowing out. At one point, Daniel turned to me and said quietly, "I never thought I'd see this day." I nodded. Neither did I. After the party, Emma ran between us, covered in frosting, holding both our hands. "You know what?" she said, beaming. "This was the best birthday ever." It was such a simple sentence, but it held everything. Later that evening, when the sun began to set, Laura lingered while Daniel packed up the car. She turned to me and said, "Do you ever feel like we're borrowing time?" I hesitated. "Every day," I admitted. She smiled sadly. "Me too. But maybe that's what parenting is, loving someone enough to know it's never really yours to keep." I wanted to say something back, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I just nodded. When she left, I sat on the porch for a long time, watching Emma chase fireflies in the fading light. The world felt still, not peaceful, but honest. I realized that maybe healing doesn't mean forgetting the pain. It means learning to live with it without letting it poison the love that's still left. That night, Emma slipped into our room, clutching her old stuffed rabbit. "Can I sleep here tonight?" she asked. I moved over, and she curled up between us like she used to when she was small. "I had a dream," she murmured, "that I was lost, but both of you found me. All of you. You and Dad, and them too." Michael kissed the top of her head. "Sounds like a good dream," he whispered. As she drifted off, I realized it was more than a dream. It was the truth. She had been lost once, in a world of papers and mistakes and grief, but somehow, against all odds, every person who loved her had found their way back to her. And maybe that was the miracle of it, that from something so broken, something whole had quietly grown. Outside, the last light faded from the sky. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel afraid of the dark. 5 years later, Emma was 16. The years had passed quietly, but time had carved its mark, not through distance, but through understanding. She was taller now, confident in ways that sometimes startled me, yet there were moments when I'd still see the little girl clutching her stuffed rabbit, afraid of being taken away. The families had found their rhythm. We shared holidays, birthdays, even small milestones. It wasn't always easy. Old wounds have long memories. But we learned to make space for one another. Emma belonged to both worlds, and somehow both worlds began to belong to her. Then, one summer afternoon, I found her sitting on the porch steps, a box on her lap. It was the adoption box, the one I'd kept tucked away for years. Inside were hospital records, court papers, and a few photos of the day we first held her. "I think I'm ready to read everything," she said. I froze. Part of me wanted to stop her, to protect her from the messiness of how love and loss had built our family. But she was 16 now, brave, thoughtful, and determined to understand the story that had shaped her. So I sat beside her, and together we opened the box. She read each page carefully, her brow furrowing as she pieced together what had once nearly destroyed us all. After a long silence, she whispered, "You fought for me." I nodded, tears stinging my eyes. "We all did." She looked up then, not at me, but toward the horizon. "Do you think they ever stopped wondering what if?" I didn't have to ask who she meant. "Probably not," I said softly. "Some questions don't disappear. They just get quieter." That weekend, Emma asked if she could visit Laura and Daniel on her own. We agreed, though my heart tightened as she drove away. It felt like watching her walk a path I couldn't follow, one that led her back through the years we'd all tried so hard to survive. When she came home that evening, her eyes were red, but her smile was gentle. "They showed me the nursery they had ready for me," she said. "The crib, the mobile, even a wall with stars painted on it. They never changed it." I pictured that room, frozen in time for more than a decade, and my chest ached. "Did it make you sad?" I asked. She shook her head. "No. It made me understand over the next few months. Something shifted. Emma began to write, pages and pages of letters, not just to us, but to both families, to the hospital clerk who confessed, even to the baby whose name she'd once been given by mistake. It was as if she were gathering every broken thread and weaving it into something whole. One evening, she handed me one of those letters. "It's for you," she said. I hesitated before opening it. Inside, in her neat handwriting, she'd written, "You once told me I didn't have to choose. I didn't understand that then, but now I do. I don't have to choose between families, because love isn't divided, it's multiplied. I came from a mistake, but I wasn't one." I pressed the letter to my chest and cried, not from sadness, but from the weight of grace. Later that summer, Emma graduated high school. Both families sat together in the bleachers, clapping and cheering as she crossed the stage. When she turned to wave, she looked at all of us. At once. After the ceremony, she pulled us into one big group hug. "You all made me who I am," she said simply. And for the first time, it didn't feel like a wound reopening. It felt like the scar finally becoming part of the skin. That night, as we drove home, Michael reached for my hand. "Do you realize," he said softly, "that we all survived this?" I nodded, smiling through tears. "We didn't just survive," I whispered. "We became something new." Later, I stood by Emma's door, watching her pack for college. On her desk were 2 framed photos. One of us, one of the Parkers. She noticed me watching and smiled. "I'm taking both," she said. "I need all of my family with me." As I hugged her goodbye, I thought about that first day, 10 years ago, when a phone call shattered the world I thought I knew. Back then, I'd believed the truth would destroy us. But it hadn't. It had rebuilt us, painfully, imperfectly, beautifully. Emma left the next morning. The house was quieter than it had ever been, but it didn't feel empty. It felt complete. Sometimes, late at night, I still think about Laura, about the woman who once stood outside my house under a fading streetlight waving goodbye. I like to imagine her now, smiling somewhere, knowing we both got to be mothers in our own way. And maybe that's the ending no one expected but everyone needed. Not one family replacing another, but love rewriting what loss once took away. Because in the end, Emma wasn't the girl caught between 2 worlds. She was the bridge that made both whole. Morning sunlight spilled across the small kitchen table where Emma's coffee had already gone cold. She stared at the steam that wasn't there anymore, her thoughts drifting somewhere between the quiet now and the noise of yesterday. The city outside moved at its usual rhythm, buses groaning, people talking, lives happening. Yet for her, time had slowed to a whisper. She had grown used to the stillness, to the hum of her apartment, the creak of the floorboards that answered her footsteps. Every sound was a reminder that she was finally living alone, and that alone no longer meant lonely. But this morning felt different. There was a thin envelope on the table, no return address, just her name written in looping handwriting that tugged at something deep inside her. For a long time, she didn't open it. She just looked. When she finally tore the edge and unfolded the paper, her hands trembled, not from fear, but recognition. The handwriting was her mother's. "My dearest Emma, I don't know if you'll ever read this, or if you'll even want to. But if you do, I hope you understand that silence was never the absence of love. It was the only way I knew to protect you from my own storms. I was young, lost, and scared. You deserved more. More patience, more peace, more me. I hope, wherever you are, life has been kinder than I was." Mom Emma read the words once, then twice. Her chest tightened, not with anger, but with something quieter, more fragile. She'd imagined this letter 1,000 times over the years. In those imagined versions, her mother begged for forgiveness or explained everything away. But this was different. It was short, unsure, human. She folded the letter back up and placed it beside her coffee cup. Tears didn't come, at least not right away. Instead, there was a stillness, the kind that arrives when something long frozen finally begins to thaw. That evening, Emma walked through the park near her apartment. The trees were losing their leaves one by one, like they were learning to let go too. She found a bench and sat there, watching the golden light fade over the playground. Children's laughter floated through the air, clear, untangled, free. For the first time, she smiled at the sound instead of wishing she could forget it. When she got home, she opened her journal, the same one filled with half-written letters to no one. She turned to a fresh page and began to write. "Dear Mom, thank you for writing. I used to think closure meant understanding, but maybe it just means acceptance. I don't need to know why anymore. I only need to know that we both tried, in our own broken ways. I'm learning to love the world again. And maybe, one day, I'll find a way to love you not for what you were, but for what you meant to me. A beginning. Emma." She placed the pen down and felt something inside her unclench. Not all wounds heal with time. Some just learn how to live in softer light. A week later, she mailed the letter. Not because she expected a reply, but because some words are meant to travel, to carry their own kind of forgiveness through the world. As the envelope disappeared into the mailbox, Emma realized she wasn't saying goodbye. She was saying enough. That night, she stood by her window, the city stretching endlessly beneath her. Lights flickered in apartment windows, small worlds inside bigger ones. Somewhere out there, her mother might still be alive, or maybe not. It didn't matter as much as it used to. What mattered was that Emma finally understood the power of her own voice, how it could break and still be beautiful. She whispered into the night, "I'm free." The words floated back to her, light as air, and for the first time, they sounded true. The winter that followed was slow, stretching endlessly across the skyline. Frost gathered on Emma's window each morning, forming delicate white rivers that melted as the sun rose. She'd trace them absently with her fingertip before heading out, her breath fogging the glass. The city was quieter in the cold. It was easier to disappear into its stillness, to exist without expectation. Emma had changed. She wasn't the girl who used to flinch at her own reflection, or the one who measured worth by how softly she could walk through the world. She carried herself differently now, not with pride, but with peace. Most evenings, she worked at a small bookshop tucked between an antique store and a bakery. The smell of coffee and old paper filled the air. She liked the rhythm there, the soft sound of pages turning, the muted laughter of strangers finding stories that reminded them of themselves. Sometimes she wondered if that's what people really searched for, fragments of their own hearts hiding between the words of others. One rainy afternoon, a young boy came into the shop, dripping from head to toe. His hair clung to his forehead, and in his hands he held a torn book, one Emma recognized instantly. It was the same title she had once loved as a child, the same story her mother used to read halfway before sleep took over. "Can you fix this?" the boy asked, voice trembling slightly. Emma smiled, taking the book gently. "I'll try my best." She led him to the counter and began taping the torn pages, her fingers steady but slow. The boy watched her with wide, trusting eyes. When she handed it back, his face lit up, that innocent gratitude only children possess, pure and unguarded. He mumbled a thank you and ran back into the rain. Emma stood by the door a moment longer, watching the small figure disappear beneath his umbrella. Her chest ached, but not from sadness. It was something deeper, the quiet ache of remembering how much tenderness still existed in the world. That night, she couldn't sleep. The boy's voice echoed in her mind, blending with old echoes. Her own voice, small and fragile, asking someone long ago not to leave. She rose, sat by her window, and began to write again. Sometimes healing isn't loud. Sometimes it's in the small things, in mending a torn page, in watching someone smile, and realizing you no longer need to be understood to feel whole. When spring finally came, it arrived softly. Buds appeared on the trees outside her window. The air smelled of rain and new beginnings. Emma started walking to work instead of taking the bus, letting the morning light touch her face. She found beauty in ordinary things, the hum of a passing train, the way strangers held doors open, the sound of laughter from a cafe she'd never been inside. One morning, as she was locking up the shop, an envelope slipped through the door slot. Her name was written on it again, the same handwriting as before, but shakier this time. She froze, pulse quickening. Inside was a single page. "Emma, I don't have much time left. I've been sick for a while. But before I go, I wanted you to know I've been reading your letters. Every word. You gave me more peace than I ever gave you. Thank you for forgiving me before I even asked." Love, Mom Emma's hands trembled as she read. But there was no rush of panic this time, no flood of old pain. Only warmth, a steady, glowing acceptance. She folded the letter carefully and placed it in her pocket. That evening, she walked to the river where the city lights shimmered on the water. She stood at the edge and let the breeze wash over her. The world around her was alive, unpredictable, imperfect, yet achingly beautiful. She whispered, "Good night, Mom." The wind carried her words away, scattering them like petals across the surface of the river. And in that moment, Emma understood that love wasn't meant to be perfect. It was meant to endure. She turned and walked home slowly, her steps light against the pavement. The city hummed behind her, and the first stars began to appear. Somewhere between the fading light and the rising night, Emma finally felt what she had been searching for all along. Not closure, not forgiveness, but peace. It rained all night. The kind of rain that blurs the edges of the city and makes the world seem softer, gentler. When morning came, the air smelled clean, like everything had been washed free of yesterday's weight. Emma stood by the window, mug in hand, watching drops race each other down the glass. She thought of her mother's last letter, now folded carefully between the pages of her journal. Every morning she read it once, not to reopen the past, but to remember that love could still exist even after goodbye. Life, she realized, doesn't stop after closure. It just changes shape. She began to notice how time moved differently now, not as a rushing current, but like a river that had found its calm. Her days filled quietly with small things, watering the plants by her window, sketching faces she saw on the bus, staying late at the bookstore to shelve new arrivals. Every ordinary moment felt sacred. She no longer searched for meaning in grand gestures. She found it in the steady rhythm of living. One afternoon, a new customer entered the shop, a man about her age, carrying a worn notebook and a camera slung around his neck. He looked like someone who had been traveling for a long time. His smile was easy, unguarded. "Do you have anything by Rilke?" he asked. Emma led him to the poetry section. He picked up a small faded copy and flipped through it. "He always makes me feel like I'm standing still while the world spins," he said with a soft laugh. Something about his voice lingered with her long after he left. Maybe it was the quiet confidence in his words, or the way he looked at books as if they were living things. A few days later, he returned. Then, again, and again. His name was Daniel. Over the following weeks, their conversations grew longer, first about poetry, then about life. They sat on the shop floor one rainy afternoon, surrounded by stacks of old books. talking about places they'd never been and memories they hadn't shared with anyone else. Emma found herself laughing more easily than she had in years. There was something comforting in the way he listened, not to fix her, but to understand. Still, she was careful. The heart, once broken, learns to walk on tiptoe. But Daniel never pushed. He simply showed up, again and again, until the fear slowly loosened its hold. One evening, as they walked along the river, the city lights shimmered like spilled stars. The air was cool, and the world felt wide open. Daniel stopped, looked at her, and said quietly, "You don't have to tell me everything. I just want to be someone who stays." The words caught in her chest. Not because they were grand, but because they were true. For the first time, Emma allowed herself to take a step towards something new, not to erase the past, but to grow from it. The days that followed were golden and slow. Spring unfurled around them, blossoms on every branch, the sky stretched wide and clear. Emma started painting again, something she hadn't done since she was a teenager. Her hands remembered the motion easily. The colors felt like language. She painted memories, the old house by the hill, the photo album, her mother's letter. But the last canvas she finished was different. Two silhouettes standing beneath a rain-soaked sky, holding hands, their reflections rippling across the water. She titled it, "The Sky After Rain." At the gallery where she displayed it, Daniel stood beside her, quiet but proud. She looked at her own work, at the story it carried, and realized she no longer felt the weight of everything she'd lost. Instead, she felt gratitude for what had broken her, for what had healed her, for what still waited ahead. Later that night, back in her apartment, she opened her window. The scent of spring drifted in, full of life and possibility. She whispered into the quiet air, "I made it, Mom." And in the stillness that followed, she could almost hear her mother's voice, not in words, but in feeling, saying, "I know." Outside, the clouds parted, the sky cleared, and for the first time in her life, Emma didn't just watch the sunrise. She stepped into it. Morning found Emma in motion again. The little bookstore had become busier with the change of seasons, and the rhythm of her days hummed like a song she knew by heart. Shelves to restock, tea to brew, the bell above the door chiming with every new face. Yet beneath all that quiet busyness, a deeper calm had settled inside her, not the hollow calm of survival, but the grounded peace of someone who had finally come home to herself. Daniel often stopped by after his photography walks, his camera slung across his shoulder, his shoes dusted with the earth of places he'd wandered. He always brought stories, a child chasing pigeons near the square, the way sunset light turned the river silver, an old man feeding stray cats behind the station. Emma listened, her eyes bright with the same wonder she used to feel as a child listening to bedtime tales. They had built something simple together. No promises, no declarations, just small shared moments. A cup of coffee gone cold while talking too long, a postcard slipped between the pages of a book, laughter that came easier every day. But one evening, Daniel mentioned he'd been offered an opportunity, a photography project overseas, one that would keep him away for months. He spoke with hesitation, testing the weight of his words. "I don't want to go if it means losing this," he said softly. Emma smiled, though her heart pulled tight. "You should go. You can't stop chasing the things that make you come alive." She knew what it meant to give up something for fear of loss. She wasn't that person anymore. In the weeks that followed, they spent more time together, not in sadness, but in a quiet awareness of how fleeting beauty could be. They visited the park where she had once sat alone, the river that had carried her goodbyes. It all looked different now, not because the world had changed, but because she had. The night before he left, Daniel brought her one of his photographs, a shot of the city skyline at dawn, the light just breaking over the water. On the back, he had written 6 words, "Some places stay, even when we go." She hung it by her window. When the day came, she walked him to the station. The platform smelled of rain and iron. They didn't say much. Words would have been too small. He held her hand, pressed his forehead to hers, and whispered, "I'll send you the sunrise." Then he was gone, the train a blur of motion and sound. That evening, Emma walked home through streets that glowed with the soft burn of sunset. The city felt vast, but not empty. She realized love didn't have to stay to be real. Sometimes it simply taught you how to open the door again. Days turned into weeks, letters began arriving, short, handwritten notes from places she'd never been. Photos tucked between them, markets, mountains, faces of strangers. Each one carried a piece of the world, and she pinned them to the wall above her desk until her room became a map of light. And then, one morning, a package arrived. Inside was a book of Daniel's photographs, published at last. On the dedication page were just 2 words, "For Emma." She sat down, the book heavy in her lap, and let herself cry. Not from sadness, but from the strange, tender fullness of being seen. She looked around her apartment. Plants by the window, the painting of the 2 silhouettes, the letter folded between her journal pages, and realized she had built a life entirely her own. That night, as the city quieted outside, she lit a candle and opened her journal again. "There was a time when I thought healing meant forgetting. But now I know it means remembering without breaking. The light doesn't always stay, but it always returns." She closed the book, blew out the flame, and stood by the window. The stars shimmered faintly through the glass, scattered but steadfast. Somewhere far away, Daniel might be looking at the same sky. And somewhere deeper still, beyond loss, beyond distance, her mother's love lived on in the quiet spaces between breaths. Emma smiled to herself, a small, certain smile. Life had taken so much, yet it had given her everything she needed to begin again. And as dawn brushed the horizon in gold, she whispered, almost to the morning itself, "Thank you for staying." The light answered, not in words, but in warmth, and for the first time, Emma understood the sky never really loses the sun. It just waits for its return. Spring came early that year. The mornings were pale and golden, the air heavy with the scent of new rain and magnolia blossoms. Emma woke before the alarm most days now, not from worry, but from the quiet eagerness of living a life that finally felt like hers. The bookstore was busier than ever. Students filled the aisles, couples wandered through, laughter spilled over from the nearby cafe. And in the middle of it all, Emma moved with a calm steadiness that made her seem part of the place itself, like one of the shelves or the sunlight that filtered through the windows each morning. She had begun hosting a weekly reading circle, small at first, just a few regulars. They shared poems, short stories, and sometimes their own words. It amazed her how easily strangers could open their hearts when given a safe place to speak. One night, as a young woman read a letter to her late father, Emma felt tears sting her eyes, not from sadness, but from recognition. Healing, she realized, was contagious. After everyone left, she stayed to tidy up. The room was quiet except for the sound of the rain starting outside. She sat by the window with a book in her lap, but didn't read. Instead, she watched droplets slide down the glass, catching the reflections of passing headlights. For the first time in years, she felt a deep stillness that wasn't emptiness, a stillness that hummed with quiet gratitude. Her life had become full in small ways. Friendships, letters, laughter, the rhythm of ordinary days. Daniel's messages still came now and then. Photos from far-off places, notes about people he'd met, skies he thought she'd love. Each one felt like a piece of the world reaching out to touch her. But she no longer lived waiting. She lived becoming. One morning, while walking to work, she passed a little community garden she had never noticed before. Children were planting seeds under the guidance of an elderly man. He smiled at her and offered a small pot with soil. "Every hand that plants keeps hope alive," he said. Without thinking, she accepted it. She carried the pot home, placed it on her windowsill, and watered it gently. A few days later, the first green sprout pushed through the soil. She laughed, really laughed, alone in her kitchen. It was such a small thing, but it felt like the universe had whispered, "You're growing too." Weeks passed. The plant grew taller. The city moved around her in the steady pulse of everyday life. Emma painted again, wrote more often, and began helping a local shelter organize book donations for children. She discovered that kindness, once given, multiplies, returning in ways we never expect. One afternoon, a small envelope arrived with a foreign postmark. She recognized Daniel's handwriting instantly. Inside was a single photograph, a field of yellow flowers stretching toward the horizon, and in the corner, the silhouette of a woman standing with her face to the wind. On the back, he'd written, "Home is not a place. It's a feeling that stays with you." She placed the photo beside her mother's letter, two fragments of different loves, one that gave her life, one that helped her rediscover it. She realized then that love doesn't vanish. It simply changes form, like light bending through glass. That evening, Emma walked to the river, the same place she had once stood years ago, whispering farewells into the night. The city around her was blooming with color. People laughed along the pathways, holding hands, chasing the wind. She leaned on the railing and closed her eyes. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of rain and lilacs. Memories rose and fell inside her like waves. Her childhood home, the silence of those lonely nights, the first letter, the bookstore, Daniel's smile. All of it, pain and joy alike, had shaped her into this moment. She whispered to the water below, "Thank you," for every ending that became a beginning. The river shimmered under the fading light, and for a heartbeat, she imagined her mother's reflection smiling back. When she returned home, the little plant on her windowsill had bloomed, a single white flower, fragile and perfect, opening itself to the evening air. She touched its petals gently and felt something shift within her, a knowing that everything she had lost had somehow led her here. She sat by the window, pen in hand, and began to write once more. There will always be moments when the world feels too big, too heavy, too loud. But if you listen closely, beneath it all is the soft hum of your own heart, still beating, still believing, still beginning again. She set the pen down, turned off the light, and stood in the quiet glow of the city outside. Her reflection in the window smiled back, peaceful and sure. The night breathed softly. The flower trembled in the breeze. And Emma, once the girl lost between silence and longing, finally understood what it meant to bloom without fear. The days grew longer, stretching like golden threads across the city. The river shimmered, the trees whispered, and everywhere Emma went, she carried a new kind of calm. Not the fragile quiet of someone avoiding pain, but the grounded peace of someone who had walked through it and found her own rhythm on the other side. The bookstore had become a sanctuary, not just for others, but for her. The familiar scent of paper and coffee greeted her every morning. The bell above the door sang its small, bright note each time someone entered, and she would look up with a smile that no longer needed to be forced. It had been a year since Daniel's letter, the one with the photograph of the yellow fields. She sometimes still traced her fingers over the image, not in longing, but in gratitude. People come into our lives for different reasons, she thought. Some to teach us love, some to teach us loss, and some to show us how to turn both into strength. One morning, as she arranged a new display near the window, an older woman stepped inside. She moved slowly with the kind of grace that comes from having lived many seasons. In her hands, she held a worn notebook. "I heard you host a writing circle," the woman said. "I'd like to join if you'll have me." Emma smiled and led her to the small table by the back wall where the others were already gathering. That night, the woman shared a poem about losing her husband, a quiet, trembling piece that left the room silent when she finished. Emma felt something tighten in her chest, that familiar ache of recognition. After the meeting, the woman lingered. "You know," she said softly, "he used to tell me that grief is just love with nowhere to go, but I think he was wrong. Love always finds a way, through words, through kindness, through the living." That stayed with Emma long after the woman left. It reminded her of her own mother, of the love that had once seemed buried under years of silence, now alive in every page she read, every smile she gave, every seed she planted. As the months passed, Emma's circle grew. People came to share their stories, of heartbreak, of healing, of the strange, beautiful mess that was being human. She began collecting their writings, curating them into a small anthology the bookstore would publish. It wasn't about fame or success. It was about giving voice to the quiet corners of the heart. One evening, while editing a story, she received an email. The subject line read, "From Lisbon." Her breath caught. Daniel. He wrote about the sea, about the light on the cliffs, about the peace he'd found in the simplicity of living. "I've been thinking," he wrote, "about how we carry people with us, even when the roads separate. You taught me that home isn't a place. It's the people who make us feel seen. I hope you found your home, Emma. I think you have." She closed the laptop slowly. Outside, the city lights blurred like constellations reflected in water. She didn't cry. She simply smiled, the kind of smile that carried both memory and freedom. A week later, she stood before a small audience at the bookstore's first reading night. The anthology was complete. Its cover was simple, a pale sky with a single flower in bloom, the same kind that now filled her window. When it was her turn to read, Emma hesitated. Then she unfolded a letter she had written but never sent, to her mother. "I used to think silence was a kind of punishment. Now I see it was a language, one I just hadn't learned to hear. I see you in the mornings when the light hits the kitchen floor, in the quiet acts of kindness I give to strangers. I understand now that you loved me the best way you knew how. And I'm learning to do the same, to love quietly, but fully." When she looked up, the room was still. Then someone began to clap, softly at first, then louder, until the sound filled every corner. Later that night, as she locked the door and stepped outside, the sky was streaked with stars. She stood for a long time, breathing in the night air. It smelled of rain and lilacs again, the scent of beginnings. The little plant on her windowsill had bloomed twice since spring. Its petals were fading now, edges curling gently with time. Emma didn't feel sadness when she looked at it. She felt awe that something so delicate could still give beauty as it faded. She made tea, sat by the window, and began writing again. This time not to understand, not to escape, but simply because she loved the act of creating something honest. "Maybe this is what it means to heal," she wrote. "Not to erase what hurt us, but to learn how to live alongside it, to let it soften us instead of harden us, to become light, not in spite of the weight we've carried, but because of it." Outside, a gentle wind stirred the curtains. Somewhere, a train passed in the distance. Emma set down her pen, feeling the quiet pulse of the world moving on, and for the first time in her life, she didn't wish to chase it. She was already where she needed to be. The night deepened, full of unseen stars. She closed her eyes and whispered, not to anyone in particular, but to life itself, "Thank you for teaching me how to stay." And in that stillness, surrounded by books, flowers, and memories, Emma realized she had not just found peace. She had become it. The first snow came early that year. Soft, hesitant flakes that floated through the air like the world had finally decided to take a breath. Emma stood by the shop window, watching them settle on the glass, each one melting into nothing before another took its place. The city moved slower under the white hush, and for once, she didn't feel the rush to keep up. Inside, the bookstore glowed like a lantern against the gray streets. The smell of cinnamon tea and old paper lingered in the air. The holiday season had brought people in, not just to buy books, but to find warmth. Emma had learned that stories did that. They were a kind of shelter, one that asked for nothing but presence. She was different now, not in a way you could see, but in the way she carried time. Where once she had measured her days by what she'd lost, she now measured them by what she was learning to love again. On a Tuesday afternoon, while rearranging the poetry shelf, she found a small envelope tucked between two books. It was addressed simply, "To whoever needs this." Inside was a folded note written in soft looping handwriting. "You are doing better than you think. Even on the days it doesn't feel like it, the small ways you keep going. That's courage. Please don't forget how far you've come." She looked around, half expecting to see who had left it, but the store was empty except for the quiet ticking of the clock. She smiled to herself. Somewhere out there, someone else was choosing kindness, the same way she once had when she left her first anonymous notes months ago. The circle had grown beyond her expectations. People who once sat in silence now read their own words aloud, their voices steady and brave. They shared laughter, tears, and awkward pauses, all the unpolished truths that made them real. Emma had become less a teacher and more a listener, a witness to transformation. One evening, as the group ended their session, one of the newer members lingered. A young man, maybe in his early 20s, nervous but bright-eyed. "I wanted to say thank you," he said quietly. "Before this, I didn't think anyone would want to hear what I had to say." Emma smiled, remembering how she had once felt the same. "Sometimes," she said, "we just need someone to remind us that our voice matters, even when it trembles." He nodded, eyes glistening. "It doesn't tremble as much anymore." That night, after everyone left, Emma turned off the lights and stood in the glow of the string lamps hanging across the ceiling. She could almost feel the echoes of their words lingering in the air, fragments of hope stitched together by vulnerability. As she locked the door, she noticed someone had placed a small pot of daisies on the front step. No note this time, just the flowers wrapped in brown paper. She carried them inside, placing them beside the window. It reminded her of the plant that had started it all, the one her mother had given her. That plant had long wilted, but she never threw it away. Its dried petals still sat on her windowsill, not as a relic of loss, but as a quiet testament to how things end and begin again in different forms. Later that night, Emma found herself writing. It had become her way of breathing. Her words were no longer heavy confessions, but small reflections, like light catching water. "Healing isn't loud," she wrote. "It doesn't announce itself. One morning, you just realize you can open the window without your chest tightening. You can listen to old songs without breaking. You can sit alone and not feel lonely. That's when you know you're free." The snow kept falling outside. It blanketed the streets, softened the edges of the world. Emma made herself a cup of tea and watched as the city lights shimmered against the white. She thought of all the people who had passed through her life, some who had stayed, some who hadn't. She no longer labeled them as right or wrong, blessing or wound. They were simply chapters, and she had learned to love every one of them for what they taught her. When she finally went to bed, she left her notebook open on the desk. In the quiet dark, the words glowed faintly under the lamplight. The next morning, the world was white and still. She walked to the bookstore early, her boots crunching against the snow. On the way, she stopped by the old park bench, the one where she used to sit with her mother. For the first time in years, she sat down, brushing off the snow. "Hey, Mom," she whispered, her voice carried softly by the cold air. "I think I finally understand what you meant. That love isn't about staying. It's about giving someone enough of yourself so that they can keep going, even when you're not there." The words didn't hurt. They felt like truth, finally untangled. When she returned to the shop, the first light of day was streaming through the windows, painting the walls in gold. She looked around, at the shelves, the plants, the letters people left for strangers, and felt something rare, contentment without condition. The past hadn't disappeared. It lived quietly inside her, like an old song she could hum without crying. And in that moment, surrounded by stories and snowlight, Emma understood. The storm had passed, but it hadn't taken her with it. It had carved space within her for gentleness, for stillness, for light. "Sometimes," she wrote that evening, "peace doesn't arrive with fanfare. It tiptoes in after the last tear, sits beside you quietly, and waits for you to notice it was there all along." She closed her journal, smiled, and whispered to the world outside her window, "I notice it now." And for the first time in a long, long time, that was enough. The city woke slowly that day, wrapped in gold. The air was still cool from the night, carrying the faint scent of rain-soaked earth and blooming jasmine. Emma unlocked the door to the bookstore, the bell chiming softly, the same sound that had once meant uncertainty. Now a rhythm of home. She moved through the familiar space, touching the spines of books, straightening a few displays, lighting the small candle by the register. Each act was simple, ordinary, but it felt sacred in its own quiet way. The shop wasn't just a place anymore. It was a map of everything she had survived, every piece of herself she had reclaimed. By mid-morning, the writing circle began to gather. Some brought new drafts, others came just to listen. The room buzzed softly with the sounds of pens on paper, murmured laughter, and the occasional clink of coffee cups. Emma watched them, feeling a gentle warmth bloom inside her. It wasn't just that they had found their voices. It was that they had learned to listen too. Halfway through the meeting, one of the regulars, a shy teenage girl named Lila, stood up with trembling hands. "I wrote something," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The room stilled. Emma smiled encouragingly. Lila unfolded a crumpled page and began to read a letter to her younger self, about being afraid, about hiding parts of herself she thought the world wouldn't love, about slowly realizing she was enough. Her voice wavered, but she didn't stop. When she finished, silence filled the space like a prayer. Then applause, not loud, but deep, sincere. Emma felt tears press at her eyes. That was what all of this had been for, the chance for someone else to stand where she once had and speak without fear. After everyone left, she stayed behind to tidy the chairs. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows, catching dust motes that danced like tiny stars. She thought of her mother again, and of Daniel, and of every version of herself that had once stood on the edge of a new beginning, afraid to move. They were all still with her, not as ghosts, but as guides. Later, she walked to the river. It had become her ritual, a quiet promise to herself to keep moving forward. The water shimmered under the light, reflecting the endless blue of the sky. A little boy nearby was trying to float paper boats. They kept sinking, but he laughed every time. His father called from a bench, "Try again," and the boy shouted back, "I will," his voice bright and sure. Emma smiled. That, she thought, was the sound of life refusing to give up. When she returned home, she found a small package at her door. Inside was a thin book with no author's name, just the title, Letters to the Quiet Heart. The first page was inscribed, "For Emma, because you taught us how to listen." Her breath caught. She flipped through it, a collection of poems and letters from the members of her circle, bound together as a gift. Each page was a thank you, a piece of their healing pressed into words. She sat by the window, holding the book to her chest. Outside, the sky deepened to a soft amber. The flower on her windowsill leaned toward the last light of day. She whispered to herself, "This is enough." Then she opened her notebook, the one she had filled and refilled through all the seasons, and wrote slowly, her handwriting steady and sure. Maybe. The point was never to become unbroken. Maybe it was to find beauty in the cracks, to let the light in, to let it stay. She looked out at the city, the same city that had once felt too large, too cold, and for the first time it felt exactly the right size. The street below hummed with life. A couple laughed, someone sang softly. A bus passed, its lights flickering across her window. She watched it all with a small smile, the kind that came not from joy alone, but from deep understanding. The world hadn't changed much, but she had, and that was enough to make everything new. As night fell, Emma placed the gift book beside the old plant and turned off the light. The darkness wasn't frightening anymore. It was soft, full of possibility. She whispered one last line before bed, not to anyone, not even to herself, but to the quiet world that had waited patiently for her to bloom. "Thank you for teaching me how to begin again." And the morning, waiting just beyond the horizon, listened. The following spring arrived softer than anyone expected. The air carried the faint scent of lilacs, and the city seemed to hum with quiet forgiveness. Emma woke early one morning to find sunlight spilling through the curtains, washing her small apartment in gold. It had been almost a year since she opened the bookstore again, and life had finally settled into something steady, something gentle. There were still mornings when she woke with a heaviness in her chest, the echo of all she had lost, but those moments no longer scared her. She had learned that grief wasn't a wound to close. It was a landscape to live within, something that reshaped her but didn't destroy her. She carried it the way people carry old scars, not proudly, but truthfully. That day, she brewed coffee and opened the windows. Down below, the street was coming alive, children running to school, neighbors greeting each other, the small rhythms that make up a life. Emma smiled, slipped on her shoes, and walked to the bookstore. It had become her anchor, her offering to the world. Inside, the smell of paper and dust greeted her like an old friend. A new shipment of books had arrived the day before, and she began unpacking them slowly. As she worked, she found a small envelope tucked between the stacks. It had no return address, just her name written in looping handwriting she didn't recognize. She opened it carefully. Inside was a single line on a piece of cream-colored paper. "Some of us heal in silence. Thank you for giving us a place to be heard." No signature. No clue who had written it. But Emma didn't need one. She set the note on the counter and let herself feel the quiet pride that came with knowing she had made a difference, however small. That afternoon, she hosted another meeting of the writing circle. It had grown, now 10 members strong. Lila, the teenage girl who had once trembled reading her letter, sat near the front, confident and smiling. She had just been accepted into a creative writing program and was buzzing with excitement. Others shared new poems, letters, and fragments of stories, all little pieces of courage stitched together by shared understanding. When the meeting ended, they lingered, talking and laughing. Emma listened more than she spoke, absorbing their voices like sunlight. For so long, her own story had been a thing of pain and loss. Now it was part of a larger tapestry, one woven with hope, forgiveness, and the simple act of continuing. That evening, after closing the shop, she walked to the park. The air was cool, the grass freshly cut. She sat on a bench overlooking the small lake and watched the reflections ripple under the fading light. Couples passed by hand in hand. A child fed ducks from a paper bag. Somewhere, a musician played a slow, sweet tune on a guitar. It struck her how life had moved on, not because it forgot, but because it knew how to keep going despite remembering. She reached into her bag and pulled out a folded letter, one she had written but never sent. It was addressed to her mother. She read it quietly, her voice barely above the sound of the wind. "I used to think the only way to honor you was to hold on to the pain. But now I see it's in how I choose to live, in kindness, in patience, in creating something gentle out of everything that hurt. You taught me to love the world even when it didn't love me back. I'm still learning, but I think I'm doing okay." She pressed the letter to her chest for a moment, then tore it gently into pieces and released them into the breeze. The paper floated over the water, scattering like soft snow before sinking out of sight. She didn't feel loss anymore, only release. On her walk home, she passed by a small art gallery. In the window hung a painting of an open field under a wide sky. Something about it stopped her, the colors, the light, the freedom it suggested. Without thinking, she stepped inside. The gallery owner smiled and said, "It's called What We Keep. The artist painted it after losing someone she loved." Emma stood in front of it for a long time. The brush strokes were wild yet careful, like someone trying to capture both chaos and peace. She bought the painting without hesitation and carried it home under her arm, the evening wind tugging gently at her hair. That night, she hung the painting on the wall above her writing desk. It filled the room with warmth, a reminder of all the things we carry that shape us, but don't define us. Before bed, she opened her notebook one last time and wrote, "We don't heal by erasing the past. We heal by weaving it into something beautiful, something worth keeping." She closed the notebook and turned off the light. Through the open window came the sounds of life continuing, laughter from the street below, the hum of a passing car, the whisper of leaves outside. She lay back against the pillow, her heart quiet and full. Tomorrow, she would wake up and do it all again. Not because everything was perfect, but because she finally understood that imperfection was what made it real. And as she drifted toward sleep, the words she had written lingered in her mind like a lullaby. What we keep is not what hurts us. It's what teaches us how to love again. Autumn returned quietly, brushing gold across the trees outside Emma's window. The world felt slower now, more deliberate. The air held that in-between chill, the kind that hinted at both endings and beginnings. Emma woke early, as she always did, to the familiar rhythm of her small apartment. The kettle humming, the soft creak of the floorboards, the city murmuring awake beyond the glass. She sat at her writing desk, the one beneath the painting she'd bought months before, What We Keep. Morning light touched the edges of the frame, and for a moment it almost looked alive. She opened her notebook, tracing the words she had written the night before. Every ending changes shape if you let the light in. There was peace in her now, not a loud, triumphant kind, but something gentler, like the steady tide against a shore. It had taken years to reach this place, but she finally understood that healing wasn't a destination. It was a practice, something she returned to again and again. At the bookstore, autumn sunlight filtered through the tall front windows. The shelves were lined with new stories, each spine a quiet promise. Lila was there, organizing the poetry section, humming softly to herself. When Emma walked in, she looked up with a grin. "Your event is tonight," Lila reminded her. "Are you ready?" Emma laughed softly. "I think so. As ready as I'll ever be." The event had been Lila's idea, a reading night where people could share stories about what it meant to begin again. Flyers had gone out across the city, and Emma was half expecting only a handful of familiar faces. But by evening, the little bookstore was full. The air buzzed with the quiet excitement of strangers becoming something more, a community woven by words. Emma stood at the front, her hands trembling only slightly as she looked out at the crowd. She recognized some faces, the writing circle, old friends, even the woman from the gallery. But there were new ones too, people drawn in by curiosity, or perhaps a quiet need to belong. She took a breath and began reading. "This story isn't about what we lose," she said, her voice steady now. "It's about what remains, the echoes that remind us we once loved deeply enough to be changed." The room was still. Her words seemed to float in the air, touching each listener in a different way. When she finished, there was no applause at first, just a shared silence that felt sacred. Then, one by one, people began to clap, softly, sincerely. Afterward, they stayed, talking, sharing, writing small notes on scraps of paper and leaving them in a glass jar on the counter. When the night ended and everyone had gone, Emma read a few of the notes. "Your words made me remember my sister. I came here alone, but I don't feel alone anymore. Thank you for reminding me that love doesn't disappear. It just changes shape." She pressed her fingers to her lips, overwhelmed by a warmth that wasn't sadness, wasn't joy, just something deep and human. Outside, rain had started to fall, soft and steady. She stood at the doorway, watching it paint silver trails across the streetlights. The city shimmered like a living thing. Lila came up beside her. "You know," she said, "I think this place saved more than just me." Emma smiled. "Maybe that's what stories do. They save us a little at a time." They stood there together in the doorway, listening to the rain. Later that night, when the shop was quiet and the lights dimmed, Emma sat once more at her desk. The painting above her glowed faintly in the lamplight. She opened her notebook and began to write again, not because she had to, but because it felt like breathing. "The people we love never really leave us," she wrote. "They become the shape of the light that finds us when the world feels dark." She closed the notebook, exhaled, and looked around her small apartment. The books, the letters, the painting, the memories. All of it, woven together, told one long, unfinished story. For the first time in a long time, Emma didn't think about what came next. She just sat in the stillness, watching the rain trace its rhythm against the window, feeling the world move softly around her. And somewhere in the quiet between heartbeats, she realized this was what peace truly sounded like. Maybe, somewhere tonight, someone is sitting in the dark. Not because they love the silence, but because they've forgotten how to reach for the light. Maybe it's you. Maybe it's someone you love. If this story found you at the right moment, maybe it's because you needed to be reminded that healing doesn't come all at once. It comes in small breaths, quiet mornings, unexpected kindness. It comes in the way we keep going, even when the world feels heavy. And if, while watching this, you felt something move inside you, even the smallest flicker, hold on to that. That's the part of you still believing in better days. Tell us in the comments, what part of Emma's journey touched you the most? Your words might be the one thing someone else needs to read tonight. If this story made you feel something, even for a moment, please tap that like button. It helps more people find their way to stories that heal. And if you want to walk with us through more stories like this, stories about loss, love, and the quiet courage it takes to begin again, hit subscribe. Let's keep growing this space together. Because maybe that's what this channel is really about. Not just stories, but connection. A place where hearts recognize each other in the dark and remind one another, we're still here. We're still trying. And somehow, that's enough. Share this video with someone who might need it. Someone who's still learning how to find their own light. You never know how far a single story can travel or whose heart it might reach next. And when you do, when you like, comment, share, and stay, you become part of the story too. This is where endings turn into beginnings. Thank you for being here.